On September 26, 2025, under cover of night over the southern coast of Alabama, the United States launched a frontal assault on the Cartel del Golfo drug cartel, a cross-border alliance formed from the ashes of the Sinaloa and Gulf cartels that had turned the Gulf Coast into a toxic highway. They were disguised as a cargo ship, carrying more than 8,000 pounds of pure methamphetamine and fentanyl precursors, a shipment worth more than $312 million, enough to poison more than 1 million Americans. On board, nearly 50 armed smugglers armed with AK-103 rifles, M16A2s, and short-barreled Uzi submachine guns guarded the cargo that would flood American streets. But the United States would not let that happen. The order was given. 120 DEA tactical agents, supported by 80 CBP officers, were deployed near the shore. Offshore, a Coast Guard cutter Hamilton, 6 Hammer fast response boats. Overhead, an MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter and 3 Navy Q-21A Blackjack drones began to spread out in a wide arc. Will the U.S. task force break this giant ship, or will they escape into the darkness? Let me show you the truth now. 4:20 a.m., September 26, 2025. Inside the DEA's Gulf Coast Intelligence Office in Mobile, Alabama, the night was thick and silent. Only the faint hum of a radar console broke the tension. On one of the glowing screens, a cluster of slow-motion dots appeared off the southern edge of the Gulf, 45 nautical miles from Pascagoula. The operator froze. For 6 months, the DEA had been quietly tracking a ghost network, the Cartel del Golfo, a vast drug empire that controlled a smuggling corridor stretching from Veracruz, Mexico, to Louisiana, and deep into the southern coast of Alabama. It was one of the most elusive drug networks in North America. They called it the invisible backbone of the Gulf. Behind those glowing dots was an empire worth killing. Intelligence analysts using 3 confidential sources, CETINT, wiretaps, and local sources, had traced a pattern: 18 small boats a month, each carrying about 470 pounds of highly purified methamphetamine disguised as frozen seafood shipments. That meant a single large convoy, now moving under a blanket of fog, could be carrying 8,460 pounds of the drug, worth more than $312 million on the black market. Enough poison to kill more than 1.2 million people. Inside the operations room, the air was thick with the smell of caffeine, maps, and fear. 120 DEA tactical agents, supported by 80 CBP officers, were deployed along the coast. Offshore, a 210-foot USCG Sea Patrol boat, Hamilton, 6 Hammer rapid response boats, an MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter, and 3 Navy Q-21A Blackjack drones began to spread out in a wide arc. Each radar flash could mean a convoy of death heading toward American soil. But what chilled the room wasn't just its size, it was the name behind it. The Cartel del Golfo organization wasn't just a typical drug cartel, it was a multinational enterprise. Former Sinaloa soldiers, former Colombian mercenaries, and Miami brokers laundering money through a dozen front companies posing as seafood exporters. As dawn began to break over the horizon, a veteran DEA agent, gray-haired, quiet, and bored with funerals, whispered to his team, "They've poisoned our churches, our schools, our families. This time we're going to cut off their heads." And so began the bloodiest manhunt on the Gulf Coast. 10 a.m. By mid-morning, the heat was beginning to bite into the warehouses of Gulfport's South Industrial District. At 1200 Industrial Road, behind rows of rusting shipping containers and idle cranes, stood an anonymous cold storage facility. From the outside, it looked like any other seafood warehouse, but inside its walls, chilled to -10 degrees Fahrenheit, lurked one of the most sophisticated drug logistics centers in the American South. For months, residents had been whispering about trucks arriving at odd hours. No labels, no drivers the locals recognized. What no one knew was that this single facility had handled nearly 102 refrigerated cargo shipments of drugs in just 2 years, each containing up to 200 pounds of meth disguised under layers of imported shrimp and ice. Total street value, more than $1.1 billion. In a nearby neighborhood, an elderly woman named Mary Collins sat by the window watching another ambulance drive by. Her 16-year-old grandson had overdosed on synthetic crystal meth produced from the same supply chain. In Gulfport alone, overdoses had spiked 42% in 2 years, a number that had turned local schools into counseling centers and church basements into temporary drug shelters. Investigators had uncovered a smuggling route that looked like a global blueprint for corruption: Mexico's Bay of Campeche, 45 nautical miles from Pascagoula. Small high-speed transship, Port of Gulfport, cold storage, U.S. distribution trucks. Each link was greased with bribes and encrypted communications routed through servers in Panama and Singapore. Money laundering tied it all together. 12 shell companies, from seafood importers to charitable foundations, moved $25 to $40 million a month, masking the gang's profits as legitimate commercial revenue. Local fishermen unwittingly moored alongside vessels carrying both shrimp and poison. The truth was more painful than any statistic. Cartel del Golfo was not an outside threat. It was rooted in the veins of the Gulf Coast, in the schools, churches, and small cafes where life was once considered safe. And as the sun shone on the harbor, the stage was set. What do you think? Could the U.S. Navy stop and destroy this entire billion-dollar drug trade right at sea? Comment below. 3:20 a.m., September 27, 2025. The bay was pitch black and silent. Only the hum of engines pierced the fog. 45 nautical miles south of Pascagoula, the radar screen on the USCGC Hamilton lit up. The target, a 103-foot freighter registered to a front company in Belize, had just slowed to 8 knots. It was Cartel del Golfo's Mar del Fuego, carrying the largest drug shipment the DEA had pursued in half a year, finally visible. From the bridge, the command rang out clearly: "Commence Operation Cold Tide." Within minutes, 6 fast response boats roared through the darkness, their muffled engines cutting through the black water like blades. Above, 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters swooped in from the north, their searchlights off, their infrared sensors on full blast. At 3:31, a drone captured the first clear image. At least 45 armed guards on the deck, some in tactical body armor, others carrying AK-103s, M16A2s, and short-barreled Uzi submachine guns. "Target identified," the commander said. "Attack." At 3:40, the first wave of attacks was swift and accurate. 110 tasers from 40C BP officers shattered the silence. Plumes of smoke billowed from the deck, and without warning, 35 Marines fired M4A1S from their boats directly at their own ship. The gang did not surrender. They returned fire indiscriminately, targeting the rams and naval gunboats. The U.S. Navy cutter Hamilton was hit by a bullet in the hull. 3 Navy sailors suffered scrapes to the shoulder and arm and were treated immediately under red lights. But the Americans continued to advance. SEALs parachuted from helicopters, their silenced rifles aimed directly at the drug lords, killing several instantly. Within 4 minutes, the smuggling dock was sealed, and the cartel was defeated. The smell of diesel fuel, blood, and salt water filled the air. Below deck, agents found 28 sealed containers filled with refrigerated containers. Inside were 8,460 pounds of meth, vacuum sealed and stamped with the Cartel del Golfo insignia. By 4 a.m., chaos had broken out on land. In Gulfport, 4 DEASWAT teams stormed the cold storage facility. Flash grenades lit up the night sky, followed by screams and the pounding of boots. Inside, 42 men were cornered, many armed, some trying to burn evidence. One man tried to flee through the cargo hold, wielding a sawed-off Remington 870, but was shot and subdued. When the dust settled, the numbers spoke for themselves. 11 gang members killed, 21 wounded, and 26 captured alive, including 6 senior lieutenants. From sea to shore, 58 arrests, no civilian casualties, and no American soldiers killed. As dawn broke over the bay, the smell of gunpowder still lingered in the humid air. The Cartel del Golfo, once considered impregnable, fell in less than 90 minutes, and for the first time in years, the Gulf Coast was fearless. Don't go anywhere. The takedown was only the beginning. What followed would expose secrets no one in the Gulf Coast was ready to face. September 28, 2025. 2 days after the night of thunder and gunfire, the Gulf Coast began to wake under a heavy silence. The sea that once hid a billion-dollar empire now reflected only the quiet hum of patrol boats drifting near the docks. Operation Cold Tide was over, but its echoes were everywhere. By dawn, 58 suspects had been processed through federal custody. 6 high-ranking lieutenants, 20 mid-level coordinators, and 32 enforcers and runners. Federal prosecutors wasted no time. Indictments were filed under the U.S. Controlled Substances Act, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, RICO Act, and Title 18 conspiracy statutes. The DEA officially confirmed the seizure of 8,460 pounds of methamphetamine, $5.3 million in cash, 12 offshore bank accounts frozen, and 4 industrial warehouses seized across 3 states. The Gulf Coast hadn't seen an operation of this scale in over a decade. But beyond the statistics, the community was shaken to its core. Local news cameras filled the streets of Gulfport and Mobile. Reporters interviewed neighbors who had unknowingly lived beside cartel safe houses for years. "We used to think the trucks were just seafood deliveries," said Linda Hart, a cafe owner whose nephew had overdosed last winter. "Now I realize they were bringing death every morning." At Gulfport General Hospital, emergency doctors reported a strange calm. Overdose admissions dropped 27% within 72 hours. For the first time in years, the ER was quiet. Yet not all was peaceful. With the syndicate dismantled, small-time dealers fought over the remaining fragments of the market. Local police recorded a 15% spike in neighborhood violence as rival crews scrambled to fill the void. Economically, over 200 informal jobs, drivers, dock handlers, off-the-books contractors, vanished overnight. Some families, once unknowingly fed by cartel pay, now faced eviction. The moral cost of crime was clearer than ever. It hadn't just poisoned veins, it had built false livelihoods. In a small church on the edge of Mobile Bay, an old woman lit a candle. Her son, arrested among the 58, had once sung in the church choir. "They took him," she whispered, "but maybe they also saved him." As the Gulf's waters calmed, the town began to reckon with a truth more powerful than the DEA's statistics: that victory always leaves behind the broken pieces of the world it tried to save. Inside the Gulf Coast Regional Command Center in Mobile, Alabama, rows of screens flickered with the final reports from Operation Cold Tide. The mission had lasted just 90 minutes, but its consequences were rewriting the region's criminal landscape. DEA Director Samuel Kerrigan opened the debrief with a simple sentence: "Cartel del Golfo no longer exists." Behind him, the data spoke louder than any speech. $312 million in drugs seized, 12 shell companies frozen across 5 states, 28 offshore transfers intercepted mid-route, totaling $87 million in cartel assets. The Gulf smuggling corridor, once described as the invisible artery of America's southern trade, was now severed. Intelligence analysts estimated that the operation would disrupt narcotics flow across the southeastern United States for at least 6 months, a blow rivaling some of the most successful cartel crackdowns of the last decade. Federal agents worked around the clock to process 2.4 terabytes of encrypted data recovered from seized laptops, ledgers, money trails, coded transactions, even private messages, revealing ties to corrupt customs officers and political donors. What had begun as a coastal drug bust was now expanding into a nationwide financial investigation. But beyond the metrics and arrests, the briefing carried a more human note. In towns like Gulfport, churches and schools reopened community programs with renewed purpose. The Department of Health announced an emergency grant of $3 million to fund addiction treatment and job rehabilitation centers for families affected by the syndicate's collapse. For the first time in years, the Gulf Coast was learning how to breathe without fear. As the meeting adjourned, Director Kerrigan looked through the glass toward the quiet harbor. "This isn't the end," he said softly. "It's a beginning." The sea doesn't forgive. It remembers. So will we. That night, as dusk fell over Mobile Bay, church bells echoed through the humid air. Families gathered, candles flickering in their hands. The ocean was calm again, but no longer silent. It had become a witness, a reminder that justice, once awakened, never sleeps. The Gulf slept again. Its waves, once carrying poison and blood money, now rolled quietly beneath the orange glow of dawn. The docks of Gulfport smelled once more of salt, not fear. Fishermen returned to the piers, children walked to school, and for a brief, precious moment the coast remembered what peace felt like. At the DEA headquarters, Cartel del Golfo's case file was sealed and filed under a single label. Operation Cold Tide complete. But the agents knew the ocean never truly keeps its promises. It hides scars beneath its calm surface. Some of the men captured would talk, others would vanish into legal shadows. The empire had fallen, but its roots, greed, despair, addiction, still reached into the soil of every American town. Yet something had changed. For the first time in years, the community believed again. In law, in order, in hope. Churches held vigils not for the dead, but for the saved. The $3 million fund for recovery programs began rebuilding what crime had destroyed: trust. Standing at the harbor, a veteran Coast Guard officer watched the horizon and whispered to himself, "The sea never forgets what it swallows." He knew the war wasn't over, but tonight it was America's tide that ruled these waters. And as the sun climbed higher, the Gulf shone not as a border of fear, but as a frontier reclaimed by justice. If you believe America's strength must never be silenced, then show your support. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel, because only together can we keep these untold stories alive.